Hey everyone and welcome to the video. So recently I've been thinking a lot about Saints Row, its directions and how we kinda got here, and I want to talk about something that I think is Saints Row's biggest downfall, or at least one of them, and that is Saints Row is not being itself. Bear with me here. I think a lot of the issues people have with Saints Row stem from a lack of unoriginality to what made it original in the first place. Too many people were swaying their opinions around on what Saints Row is and isn't, and now we're at a point where even Saints Row doesn't know what it is. And that really hurts. I think that a lot of the problems people have with the reboot with Saints Row 4, Saints Row 3, help even 2, one is that Saints Row is not being itself. Saints Row isn't Saints Row. It's this, as Flippy stated, grab bag of other games that are popular at the time, and I think that that really has to stop. Saints Row started out really unique. It knew exactly what it wanted to be. It was a gang simulator that put a heavy emphasis on fun and not too much on realism. Whilst it still emulated and simulated gang life, it tried to keep things funny and slightly light-hearted, and we loved it for that. Whilst having its serious moments, it knew exactly what it was. Saints Row 2 did this to an even better degree. But then what happened was people carried on making the GTA clone comparisons, and Saints Row had to change its identity, and this is where we had this downfall. Saints Row 3 was a drastic redesign because it didn't want to be called a GTA clone, and yes, it started to become its own thing, but it wasn't what Saints Row was. It was just a completely different thing. Followed up by Saints Row 4, which kinda was screwed from the beginning by the fact the company was going under, and it kinda got rushed out as a DLC expansion. It still also sucked. And then following up, we have Agents of Mayhem, which basically tried to hammer in that it's kinda like Saints Row, which again led Saints Row to be even more unoriginal and just, again, a grab bag of whatever Saints Row wants to be at the time. And then we have the reboot, which is a drastic redesign of everything again. It's quite clear to see that Saints Row doesn't know what it is. But a lot of this does stem from people putting in their opinions about what the series should be, and people kind of messing around with things. I mean, 3 was a drastic redesign because everyone kept comparing Saints Row 1 and 2 to GTA. 4 was really screwed over by the publisher going under, and basically were forced to make a DLC expansion. That's not what Saints Row is, and I think that does rely a lot on the fault of some of the publishers that decided to make it that way. And then you have Agents of Mayhem, which was kind of its own thing, but just hammered in that it was really like Saints Row again, and I think it doesn't help that the marketing was like that, and they add characters from the game. Thanks for that, Sony. And then the reboot's different. It's definitely unique, and it's definitely something Saints Row hasn't done before, but it's not Saints Row. And I think that that's the best way to put it. I'm not going to be lame and call it woke or a Watch Dogs 2 clone, but the point is that games that try this style that Saints Row went for have done it better. And whilst I do love the reboot a lot for everything it did for the channel, and the fact I just like the game, there are at times where I feel it just kind of feels a bit too much like another series, which is again, Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs 2 did this reboot style really well, and I can't help but feel that the reboot tried to hammer in on that, and perhaps it took a bit from that and that inspiration, and that's why we got what we got. But really, to me, I'm confused with what the reboot is, because it's not Saints Row, but it's not necessarily like anything else we have out there. It's just not Saints Row. It's not very unique, and again, I don't think it's very original to itself. And we do just have features blatantly ported over from other games. Now, I'm not going to be the person that complains about this. I really don't care what we take from other games when it comes to features, but I think stylistically, Saints Row needs to be its own thing. We can't just, again, make a grab bag of games. I really think its overindulgence in just going into other franchises and taking what it wants does take away from what Saints Row could be. I would like Saints Row to be a franchise that sets a standard and makes other ones take inspiration from it. Not the reverse. We shouldn't just be taking inspiration from everything and putting it onto one game and thinking that's job done complete. I feel like people should be looking at Saints Row for inspiration after having the game series be going on for nearly 2 decades. I think it's worth, Saints Row being its own thing, and we shouldn't be looking at Saints Row like, what are we going to get next time? I feel like after 2 decades of having running games, we should know what Saints Row is, and I don't. I don't know what Saints Row is. If it's purple and it has a group of people called the Saints, it's Saints Row. Or hell, even if it's just got a saint in it, it's classified as a Saints Row game. Look at Agents of Mayhem. So I guess what I'm really saying is if I have any recommendation for what Saints Row should do in the future as a fan, I think it should try its hardest to be its own thing. I think it shouldn't be constantly taking inspiration. A little's fine, but it should really try and define what itself is before adding defining features from other games. I think Saints Row needs to know what Saints Row is, I think we need to know what Saints Row is, and I think they need to get the basics done correctly. So if Gearbox is taking over and they're going to do a new start to this franchise, good on them, but but they need to make sure they know what Saints Row is. If they're going to continue with a Reboot 2, that's fine, but continue on in a correct way that people will be happy with. Make Saints Row Saints Row. And I think that once we finally reclaim the identity of what Saints Row is, and we know what this game franchise is and what it can be, we can start talking about taking steps in the right direction. But at the minimum, we have seriously, and I mean seriously, got to be able to define what a Saints Row game is. Because right now, all I associate with Saints Row is purple, an open world crime game. That's not enough. We need more. I think that Saints Row should really make an effort for being Saints Row and being what it is, and stop trying to be something it's not. And on top of that, if they want to do it in a wackier style and do what they want, whilst it may not please everyone, at least I know what Saints Row is at this point. Do whatever you want to do, but do it right and do it correctly. And then we can start talking about preferences and quality again. But truthfully, the biggest issue I have is I don't even know what a Saints Row game is at this point. It's just so wild that I just don't have a clue. And I think that this will be the only way to really reclaim Saints Row as anything. I think if we want Saints Row to come back to the golden ages of being a great game that people love to play, I think they have to do something inspired. I think they have to be inspiring. They have to be legendary. They have to put the effort into making Saints Row something people pay attention to. Saints Row used to be all the rage back even in the Saints Row 3 days when the games weren't that good, because regardless of its quality, it knew what it was. And whilst I may not like Saints Row 3 for what it did and how it changed up the formula, it was different from GTA, and it was like, okay, that's the direction Saints Row wants to go in. It's a big overhaul, but at least that game is trying to be its game and not trying to be a mishmash of every other game out there. But then as time went on, we seemed to just get games that were completely full of other games' elements, and I just don't like that. And even though I talk about Saints Row 3 somewhat positively here, it's not innocent, but at least it had the buzz around it. But now Saints Row is just so far from what Saints Row should be that it's not even getting the correct buzz, it's just getting negative attention, because it just looks like a knockoff of every other game. At least Saints Row, when it wasn't a good quality game, was Saints Row. Even if it's Saints Row 3 it sucked, it was Saints Row. But now the reboot's just being compared to other games as a knockoff because the quality's so poor and it's nothing unique, and I think that that's what makes people look at the reboot with such disdain. It needs to become unique again. Saints Row needs to be unique, and Saints Row needs to be a household name. And the only way to do that is to give it some identity. At least, that's my opinion. But let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you did enjoy. Like, comment, subscribe. It boosts the channel. It makes me feel good about myself. And I'll see you soon.